Hey everybody, KMO here. Today I read in a newsletter that I've subscribed to called Imaginative that the AP is experimenting with AI basically in their reporting. Now AP Associated Press is considered to be a pretty reliable and pretty centrist news organization. They don't have a decided, political slant, and they have a high readability score. I think 42 out of 64, which is pretty good. But they have an agreement, like an official agreement with OpenAI. And the basic gist of the guidelines that AP has issued, to their writers and editorial staff is you can't really use it as a research shortcut. You can't use it as a replacement for reporting or, investigative reporting. No imagery. I mean, maybe you can use like artwork and illustrations generated by AI, but certainly nothing that looks photographic that might be taken as a photograph, might be misconstrued as a photograph. And most importantly, you can't print anything that GPT spits out. Whatever use you make of it, you can't just use it to produce finished stories that are just going to run. No. Also, and probably of utmost importance, everything that it gives you has to be taken as unverified, which means the rigorous editorial and fact-checking process has to take place, and it's got to be, a human fact-checking process. I'm not criticizing them at all, for these cautious experiments and these sort of tentative steps. They have to be cautious. But what came to mind for me was medieval scriptoriums experimenting with limited use of printing press. But the limitation is you have to print on vellum, none of this so-called paper, which is made of wood pulp. Point being, there is no compatibility between the printing press and the scriptorium. The scriptorium, before the printing press was developed and deployed widely in Europe, was a way to copy books, to reproduce books. One book would take months or possibly a year or more to reproduce, and just uncountable human hours of labor. Now, the end product were these illuminated manuscripts, which were gorgeous. They were works of art. And something was certainly lost in switching from the hand-copied, painted and illuminated and ornately bound books, everything done by hand, to mass-produced printed books. There was definitely something lost. But what was gained was a universe of readership and also new writers and new information. And writing was suddenly able to reach a much larger audience, and now there was a reason for lots of people to learn to read. Now that also gave rise to, waves of fanaticism. And this is something I allude to from time to time. It's the thesis of Dr. Leonard Shlain, who wrote a book called The Alphabet versus the Goddess, about how when pre-literate cultures suddenly get the printing press and widespread literacy, they get really fanatical for a period. They get really ideological and intolerant of dissent. And also they tend to get rather misogynistic for a time. Even in cultures that were already quite misogynistic by contemporary standards. But ultimately, I think we're pretty much all in agreement that printed books, that living in a world where printed books are common and everybody knows how to read them, and anybody who wants to write one is welcome to do so. There's no guarantee anybody's going to buy your book, but you're certainly welcome to write one. That's better than the medieval situation of most people being illiterate and books being these things which only very, very wealthy people or the church could afford to have made for them. Where if you went to a library, the books were all chained to the stacks so that they wouldn't be stolen. This world is better. Well, the world of AI-generated content is going to cause craziness. I'm not the only person to say this, but I call it the epistemological apocalypse. We are soon going to be in a position where we just don't really have any ready way to know whether an image or a sound clip or text or anything, full motion video, if anything is authentic, if the thing that it depicts really happened. There are various proposals, various watermarking proposals and use of the blockchain to identify authenticity, but there's going to be competing standards and people are going to be ideological about which standards they trust and which they don't, and it's typically going to break down along the lines of the associations that people have. Like if if Elon Musk recommends a particular version, then everybody who hates Elon Musk for whatever reason is going to object to that particular technology, even if he had nothing to do with developing it, even if it's just the one he picked out to use for his purposes. People are going to say it's totalitarian nonsense and all lies and Nazism and everything else that they accuse Elon Musk of. Dare I segue? I listened to a 3-hour plus episode of Impact Theory today with Tom, last name escapes me, but it was a conversation with Sam Harris. Now, a lot of the same people who absolutely hate Elon Musk absolutely hate Sam Harris for a lot of unhinged reasons. But Sam Harris definitely lost a lot of his credibility with his established followers when he said that it doesn't matter what's on that Hunter Biden laptop, that the New York Times and every other news agency that suppressed the story just before the election was right to do so. And that I think the thing he said was that it doesn't matter if there's child pornography on it. No crime that could be on there would be worse than the re-election of Donald Trump. And he worked a long time to shore up his opinion there. I mean, to shore up his arguments for it. I don't know that I'm convinced, but that's my major beef with Sam Harris, is that from my perspective, he cuts way too much slack to systems of authority and institutions of authority, that he's willing to overlook their crimes and misdemeanors with far more readily than he would those of people on the fringes. And I can totally get where he's coming from. Like, I forget the guy's name, but there's a researcher that I interviewed last year for the Padverb podcast who was researching misinformation and disinformation and malinformation. And he basically said that people would be better off just believing everything that the BBC tells them than going out into the internet and, trying to do their own research. The internet is just a wilderness of bullshit that is going to appeal to your priors and your vibes. And, if you reject the authority of the mainstream institutions which are meant to vet information, you are much more likely to go astray when you go out to find your own truth than if you just believe the official story, even though the official story is demonstrated to be biased and full of lies. It's still more accurate than you're going to put together on your own, just using your own intuition and your own feelings about what feels right, what seems right, what agrees with your pre-existing commitments. That's a trap. That's a huge trap. And you're better off just taking in the official story along with its nuggets of lies and propaganda. I'm reporting a point of view here. It's a point of view that I'm somewhat sympathetic to, but it's not one that I give a wholehearted endorsement to. So for those of you because I paraphrased that at one point, at least one person said, oh, that KMO now believes that you should believe the New York Times and the BBC about everything. Anyway, putting all that aside, medieval scriptoriums, could they have possibly coexisted with the printing press, like up to the present day, if they'd played their cards right? No. No, they could not. They would not be a viable business model. I mean, maybe there's a billionaire today who loves, illuminated manuscripts and would pay a workshop full of artisans to hand copy and reproduce books for him. But that doesn't scale up to be an industry. That's a curiosity. And as far as I know, it's one that exists only in my imagination. Can the traditional media, the gatekeeping media, the legacy media, I think is the best way to describe it right now, or to describe them, media is plural. Can the traditional media maintain their position of dominance, maintain their position as being the official arbiters of truth and, the official keepers of the Overton window in the emerging era of generative AI? No. No, they cannot. It doesn't matter how careful they are. It doesn't matter how bold they are. They are about to have their lunch eaten. And there's just nothing they can do about it. So, again, I don't criticize the AP for this sort of tentative, maybe overly cautious experimentation with the use of generative AI, but their lunch is eaten. It's just a question of time of how long before they look down and they notice that there's just crumbs left on their plate. And, you know, this is kind of a different tangent, but the media, in particular, the portion of the traditional media that provided the basis for most news stories was newspaper reporting. Investigative journalists working for newspapers. Well, over the last 20 years, newspapers, I mean, a lot of them have just shuttered. They've just closed shop. And the ones that remain, they've been cutting reporters. And yet at the same time, the cable news media, the talk shows, the daytime talk shows on all the linear TV networks, NPR, all these podcasts, all these, YouTube channels, they're hungry for content. Well, it used to be that even on TV, most stories started as newspaper reporting. Now there are fewer newspapers than ever before, and they're doing less reporting than they used to do. They've cut their reporting staffs. And most importantly, reporting used to be a working class profession, and now it is an elite profession, largely because you have to do these long unpaid interns. And who can do that except the children of rich families? And most of the people who are, who have the connections and the financial wherewithal to get through that initial, filter of the unpaid internship, they're going to be elites. They're going to be Ivy League educated rich kids who are going to have, the value system of the elites, which is to say woke. The more that transformation takes place, the more the people who used to rely on the legacy media as a source of information see themselves being preached to and talked down to and lied to, and they say, fuck this, and they go listen to Joe Rogan, or they go over to YouTube and they watch, Crowder or Shapiro or, Crystal and Sagar, or, the people who took over at Rising, Robbie and Brianna. And these are people I name because these are people I tune in to from time to time, not Crowder or Shapiro. Nothing, it's not so much that I object to their politics, it's more just their presentation, their personality, their energy that rubs me the wrong way. I'm just not interested in what they have to say. And, if those are your go-to people, well, good on you. Somehow you overlap with me, I don't know. Oh gosh, here I am rambling at 14 minutes. It occurs to me to talk about the Hollywood writer strike, and I've been meaning to talk about that for my Behind the Paywall podcast, the C-Realm Vault podcast. That's going to be episode number 464 is where I'm going to talk about that. So I've got a lot to say on that topic, and it's a dangerous thing to start talking about now here at the 15-minute mark of a video. So I'm going to refrain. But I will say, I'm holding my phone right now in the portrait mode, and that's because I just use this video that I'm shooting as an insert, basically, and then there's a portrait or a landscape mode image in the background, and then I put up images on the side. It is the stuff that I do after I've turned off the phone and I'm not recording anymore that takes 4/5 of the time or more. I could do a lot more content if it wasn't accompanied by, the visual elements that I put up. What would you prefer? Would you prefer more content, or would you prefer that I stick with this, jabber into a phone for 20 minutes, edit for an hour, and then spend a couple hours putting in, video clips and images and captions and additional information, that people take in visually? Because I know some people just listen to this, and all the stuff that I do after I've stopped talking is utterly wasted effort, from their perspective. So what's your perspective? Would you prefer more content or about as much content as you're getting now with the same level of post-production effort put into it? And also, what is your anticipation of the fate of the legacy media? I mean, already, this is the go-to example, and there are many others like it. I just don't know all the personalities involved, but Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan has a much bigger audience than any other, legacy media figure. In fact, you take all of the pundits on CNN and put them together, and they don't have nearly the audience or the reach or the influence of Joe Rogan. And yet Joe Rogan is still considered to be this sort of outsider, fringy, not serious personality. Whereas, the serious news agencies, the ones that have a perpetual invitation to the White House news briefings, the press briefings, they have tiny, tiny audiences. I mean, I've heard that there are people who watch CNN outside of airports, but damned if I know any of them. Anyway, what's your relationship to the legacy media, and what are your expectations for them? All right, catch you later.